All
right, yes.
Oh, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't muted.
And call
Okay,
to order
just checking. Thank you.
Okay. Call to order the regular meeting of the Rio Dell City Council. City Clerk, could you have roll call, please?
Mayor Garnes,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Woodall,
Here.
Councilmember Johnson,
Here.
Councilmember Strand,
Here.
Councilmember Wilson,
Here.
City Manager Knopf,
Here.
Chief of Police Connor, Finance Director Dillingham,
Here.
Community Development Director Caldwell, Water Roadway Superintendent Jensen,
Here.
Wastewater Superintendent Taylor,
Here.
and the City Clerk is present. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We are returning from a closed session and there is nothing to report out. Public presentations. This is the time for persons who wish to address the council on any matter not on this agenda and over which the council has jurisdiction. As such, a dialogue with the council is not intended. Items requiring council actions not listed on this agenda may be placed on the next regular agenda for consideration if the council directs, unless a finding is made by at least 2/3 of the council that the item came up after the agenda was posted and is of an urgency nature requiring immediate action. City Clerk, are there any public comments?
Yes, Mayor Garnes, we did receive 2 public comments via email. One is unrelated to an agenda item and one is related to the priority setting session. So I will read the unrelated item now. I am a local resident, a local Rio Dell resident, and I have several questions and concerns about our neighborhood currently. First, I'm extremely upset with the rise in crime, with police having limited ability to arrest proper people who are doing things that before coronavirus they would be arrested for. Many neighbors have experienced issues lately in regards to stolen property and constantly seeing drug addicts wander the streets, screaming and causing trouble 24/7. What can we do to feel safer in our neighborhoods? Also, I would like to know what it would take to get a contact with animal control in regards to several repeat offenders letting dangerous animals out to do as they please, as well as several complaints of suspected animal abuse, yelps, and dogs crying outside 24/7. Do we have proper noise ordinance that would generally stop people from letting their dog bark the entire night? And she said, thank you, Katie Connaught. And that's the only one we received.
Thank you. So now we will,
And actually, Mayor Garnes, let me just check to see if anybody is called in who'd like to do public comment. If you have dialed into the Zoom meeting, please raise your hand by dialing *9. All right, seeing none, back to you, Mayor Garnes.
thank you.
Mayor Garnes, a point of order. You there?
Yes, yes.
Did we dispense with the flag salute?
Just for the Zoom meetings, because it was awkward, you couldn't follow, it was delayed, lag. So,
All right, it's just for the Zoom meetings then.
correct.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Mhm. Okay. Now we will move on to the consent calendar. Is there any council member who would like to remove anything from the consent calendar? Only one item. Councilmember Wilson?
Nope.
Councilmember Strawn? Councilmember Strawn shook her head in case you didn't see that, Karen. Councilmember Woodall?
No.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Okay. Would you, well, there's only one item, so would you like to speak to that, please? Councilmember Johnson?
I'm sorry, I guess I didn't understand what you were talking about, Mayor Garnes. Excuse me
Oh,
for
I
that.
asked if you wanted to remove anything from the consent calendar.
No, I do not.
Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So
I
moved.
so move.
Is there a
I
second?
second.
We have a motion and a second. Councilmember, Mayor Pro Tem Woodall,
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Strawn,
Yes.
Councilmember Wilson.
Yes.
And I vote yes, that motion carries 5-0. City Manager, we are now on to, well, were there any, I didn't ask if there was any public who had rung in, dialed in. City Manager?
So for the consent calendar, again, if anybody on the Zoom call would like to speak to the consent calendar, press *9 now. And I am not seeing any hands up, so I think we are good to go.
Thank you. So we're moving on to staff communications. Page 17. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor Garnes, members of the council. The staff did have a short phone call and some email exchanges with representatives from Pacific Gas and Electric that they are reporting to this, that the city of Rio Dell specifically is included in the islanding of the Humboldt Bay power plant and the Humboldt Bay electrical grid. So a test occurred back on May 9th for this new configuration. And this configuration hopefully will limit the city's exposure to PSPS events in the summer and late summer seasons. As the council is well aware, we went through some PSPS events earlier, multi-day events without any electricity. The likelihood of those events, provided that everything goes as PG&E says, is now lowered for this area. However, it's not eliminated. So there's still a good possibility that the community could be impacted by PSPS events, particularly if fire conditions in the immediate vicinity reach that level. However, with all the rain and the general wetness of this area, it's a little less likely than some of the interior regions. So that was positive news to hear. And back on their May 9th test, as far as we're aware, there was no negative impact to the Rio Dell grid when they did that switch.
Awesome. Yay.
Are they going to do any more tests?
I don't know. I would imagine they would probably try to test it one more time because I understand that there were some problems in Fortuna. But we haven't heard of them scheduling any tests at this point in time. So the mayor, representatives from DHHS and the Community Resource Center, as well as myself, met over Zoom with to talk about homelessness following the last council meeting. I think it was a productive conversation, and certainly one that we will need to have more of in the future. And that was, I think, universally agreed that that would be helpful. And we are aware of some of the failing pavement over on Rigby Avenue as part of the Danco project, and have been discussing that with them. And the city has been working with County OES in terms of the business reopening plans. We've been trying to make sure that Rio Dell businesses are not left behind in that process. And I think so far we've been successful in that, and that the plans that have been submitted have been reviewed. We have sent out letter, physical correspondence to our brick and mortar businesses to help them through that process of opening up back up for business. So I think so far Rio Dell is pretty well covered, but we'll be receiving an update later this week in terms of the progress on that. And then also with the council's direction at the last meeting, I've been working with our city engineer and a local resident on some concerns regarding the ATP project, and I'm glad to say that those have come to a resolution. So most of the concrete work should be finished on the ATP project early next week, possibly by the end of this week. But they're going to be starting to wrap that up, the concrete portion, and then paving. There isn't a set time for that, but probably within the next 2 weeks, we'll start to see more asphalt work. And then really it's that project there'll probably be a little bit of a lull in it as the sidewalks get finished and the asphalt gets laid. There will be slurry sealing that will occur, and so Mercer Fraser is using as a subcontractor the same contractor who is doing the regional slurry seal bid, and they're not expected to be out here until late July, and it's not clear where they will start because they have jobs in Southern Humboldt all the way up to Arcata, I believe, and I don't know exactly if they're going to start in the north or the south yet, but that process should be hopefully wrapped up, and the roads are painted and the project finished up hopefully by the end of August. So that's where we're at with that. And then we also have reports from the city clerk, the police department, and our community development director as part of the report. If you have any questions, let us know. Thank you.
I have a question for the city manager.
Go ahead.
Okay, with the phone call between the mayor and the DHS and you said there more conversations will be coming. I hope they're sooner rather than later. There's a lot of concerns in the community, and I think we need to ramp this up a little bit. It's been 2 weeks already. We need to follow through as soon as possible, and that's just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Strawn? I
Yeah,
saw you raise your.
Yes, mine is the same concern with the Danco project, Cottage Bluffs. Is DHHS now committing to taking care of these people? Are they now going to be setting up meetings like promised in the beginning, appointments for them to help them? And what about the 24-hour guards?
Okay. I'm sorry, city manager. I didn't know if you were going to start talking or not.
Yeah, I think the part of the problem that the county has experienced is that, and I don't really want to speak for the DHHS director, but they have had some issues revolving around COVID in terms of providing regular services there and having personnel at the site providing those services. As that crisis begins to wrap up and normal operations start to resume, the staff should be returning back full time there to the site. And then in terms of the facility security, that is the landlord's prerogative for the security at the site.
Could you explain that a little further on, you said it's a prerogative for the? the site?
Yeah, so yeah, also you have to remember that for the city, our only input in the Danco project was related to design review. So we put out an FAQ explaining kind of the limitations in terms of what this city, could require or anything like that. And so Danco had talked about a security guard, but the city had no authority to require a security presence at the site.
I understand what you're saying, city manager, but it just seems like that was a pretty prevalent conversation in all of the public meetings, in the council meetings that we had after, and I think before the public meetings, that the security was going to be there. And that's part of what raised the question, was having the city, having the surveillance. Why was there a need for it? And so that sparked a lot of conversation that got things going. And I guess we didn't fill out the right form or make the right statement, but it was pretty well implied that they were going to have the security there. And without going back and finding all of the minutes and the notes, did anybody else hear that in the conversations, or was it just my?
No, absolutely.
No, I agree with you. I heard
I
it.
think we all thought that's what we heard, but I think looking back at the actual written documents, there is no enforceable thing that the city has that can make Danco do what they said just to do what they said they were going to do. So, and Chris Dart was not on that phone call that we had, so he was not questioned. I could not question him at the time.
I think that is straight up negligence to me, and I believe that the city should be able to take some form of reparation against Danco. They promised us that.
Chris Dart was in most of these conversations and pretty vocal about taking care of us. And if it speaks to anything, it speaks to the credibility of his word to follow through on. He knew what he wasn't saying. And whenever we got out of Mr. Dart, you had to specifically ask him point blank questions, and then he had an answer, but he volunteered not much unless we asked. And he spoke to this, and I think his word is very failing at this point.
I think we all agree with that for sure.
He needs to have a letter written to say that.
Chief Connor, would you like to say something? Speak to that.
I had the opportunity to be at River Bluff several times in the last couple of weeks, and I discussed both of these topics with Brittany. Nick, the DHHS worker, is back there part-time. He's not full-time because he still has some COVID issues dealing with childcare for his kids, but they are anticipating that he will be back full-time in the very near future. And as for the security guard, if I understood Brittany correct, they have a security guard who works 40 hours a week. His schedule varies as they requested, and it appears that most of the time he spends watching the security cameras. They have had problems with people jumping the fence in the middle of the night to gain access to the property and not go through the locked lobby where there's also now a camera. I hope that answers some of your questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions on this for Chief Connor or for the city manager?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I would request that we take some of these comments that are made by the council, and I'd like to ask that the city manager write a letter to Mr. Dart expressing our concerns, along with the police reports that Chief Connor has put on here, and he told us last week there was going to be more of them, which there are. That I would like to see that forwarded to Mr. Dart.
I agree with that.
I agree.
I'm sorry. It was supposed to be 48 hours, 40 hours a week. It's not 48-hour guard. And I think a letter should also be written to the state of California. They're supporting the funding for these projects for Danco, and they need to be aware that they are not following up.
I agree.
That is. So I don't think this is a vote issue, but I think you have a consensus there on what the council will like there, city manager.
Yeah, we'd be happy to bring that back at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for any other staff?
Yes, I have a question for Chief.
Go ahead.
Can I go? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There was an issue. There was an issue down on 4th Street this weekend with the state parks. I was wondering if you going to a certain house that we've all had problems with. Can you tell us anything about that?
So I don't have a whole lot of information. I was not working that day. Sergeant Bouchain had been contacted by state parks. He wanted to participate in the search warrant, but he had a domestic violence in custody case. It's my understanding from limited information I got that it was a search warrant for stolen wood products. I do not know what they found, but I think they were somewhat successful. And other than that, I really don't know a whole lot more.
Oh, okay. Thank
I do
you.
not know if anybody was arrested, for example.
Boy, now would be the time. That's been a sore spot for a long time for us to go in and go ahead and do an abatement there, but that's just my opinion. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for staff?
No.
Okay, Councilmember Johnson, I can't see you, so
No questions, Mayor Garnes.
thank you. And are there any public comments or emails or phone ins, city manager?
So again, anybody who has called in to the line, if you want to speak under public comment, simply press *9 and we can open up the line to you. And Mayor Garnes, I am not seeing anybody raising their hand.
Thank you.
No public comments emailed either.
Thank you, city clerk. So now we will move on to the annual rate adjustment to solid waste agreement. City manager.
All right. Thank you, Mayor Garnes and members of the council. This this item is on page 22 of your packet. So every year we go through and do our franchise rate adjustment for our franchise holder for solid waste and recycling services, which is Recology Eel River, formerly Eel River Disposal. And so Eel River Disposal became Recology Eel River back in 2018. And we have been working with them ever since. And I believe they are now the largest service provider, not just countywide, but also in this area. You'll see on the sheet, we have a sheet that's on page 24, excuse me. We have a sheet that we have been using over the past several years, a breakdown that the council requested in the past to help explain or synthesize the rates a little bit and provide the breakdown for the fees, which can be compared year over year. In addition to which, we also have the letter and correspondence from Linda Wise, the general manager of Recology Eel River, including the specific calculations and the sheets that they use to develop the rates. We did review them and have found them to be, consistent with methods used in the past, and overall are pretty much in line with the trends that we've seen, which are pretty slight gradual increases over time. So with that, what I will do is hand this over to Linda on the line. And Linda, hopefully you can unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm here.
All right, awesome.
Okay, hi there.
Hey.
Okay. Yes, so that as Kyle noted, that this is an annual process that through our contract, our franchise agreement with the city of Rio Dell, that we're allowed to analyze the rates every year and apply a CPI index to the rates, which you'll see in the package. This year, and the CPI index is detailed in our contract, franchise agreement. And this year, the CPI increase for the time period that's in question is 2.5%. However, that's not the increase that we're seeing to people's collection rates at the curbside, because after the implementation of our franchise agreement, we entered into, as you know, the recycling processing agreement with HWMA, for which the city of Rio Dell is a member. And as part of that is we're allowed to do a pass-through for recycling processing fees. And that's based on the number of tons that are collected in the various jurisdictions. And we apply them based on what the tonnages are as we become aware of them year to year. When we began our recycling processing agreement, we had to make a lot of estimates about tonnages of origin by jurisdiction. And so as you see that we had overestimated the number of tons through the city of Rio Dell. And this year we are making an adjustment to the franchise collection rates at the curbside. So the overall increase to people's curbside rates is 0.89%, not 2.5%. So it's an average rate because it's based on the size of the container they have. So that's where we are. Any questions?
Thank you.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Linda, when we talked at the last HWMA meeting, we were taught there was a discussion of the increase for the recycling, and that was put off for a final decision, I think, till the month of June. Is that included in this, or is that yet to come?
Well, what we did was when the HWMA did was to approve a not to exceed number that was our proposed recycling processing fee that can be reduced without and applied to people's rates without coming back for council consent. We can always charge less without going to the city council, but we can't charge more. So what we did was with the HWMA was to agree to have further review of the recycling processing fees and would come back to get a final approval of the recycling processing fee. So we can't go over what we've put into your rates, but we can go less and make an adjustment later and do that through people's billing. So it'd just be pennies probably to the city of Rio Dell rates, but that's where we are right now. We've just recently gotten a correspondence from them and are reviewing what we got. So I think that there's going to be more dialogue that we need to have. So it may not happen in June, it may happen in July.
But it's no significant increase.
Oh, no. As you can see in your rate package, you can see that it only makes up about less than 4% of what the total rate is in that's charged to your curbside customers.
Okay, I'm good. I wasn't totally sure. I thought it was going to be more than it is. So it's,
yeah. I think when it gets presented as a rate increase for the fee, it gets presented as a percentage like 15-18% or something like that, and people think that's going to be on their garbage rate, and it's not. It's just a very small percentage of what is charged at the curbside.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from council? Councilmember Strawn, go.
No questions.
None
Councilmember
from me.
Johnson, I had called on Councilmember Strawn. She's gonna go. Then you'll be next.
Yeah. So Linda, so you're just saying it's going to be in total 0.86% increase.
Right. That's an average on people's bills. We took an average because in some cases it might be 8.4 and some it might be 8.9. It depends on what the size of their service is.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Johnson?
No questions.
Okay. Councilmember Woodall?
No questions.
City Manager, are there questions from the public? Or-
And again, *9 to raise your hand. And I am not seeing any raised hands.
And City Clerk, you have nothing?
Nothing, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda.
Sure. Thank you.
So we are, let me just get back to the page there.
Actually, can I back up a second? I might have missed something, but was there a motion and a?
No, that was about to do that.
Oh, okay.
I just had to was getting questions out of the way first. Okay, is there a motion to approve the annual adjustment?
I'll make that motion.
I'll
Second.
second.
We have a motion and a second. City Clerk, could we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Mayor Pro Tem Woodall,
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Strand,
Yes.
Councilmember Wilson,
Yes.
Mayor Garnes.
Yes. Motion carries 5-0. Thank you very much, Linda.
Thank you.
Now we will move on to the priority setting session. The priority setting session on page 34. City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor Garnes and members of the council. So we've been doing these priority setting sessions since about 2017. In that year, the council identified street work, the habitat parcel, I&I mitigation, the cannabis tax measure, as well as the adjustment to the legalization of cannabis through Proposition 64. In 2018, the council identified street work, river access, the habitat parcel, code enforcement, and access Humboldt as the priorities for that year. Last year, code enforcement, police department employees, street work, water and sewer studies, and economic development rounded out the top of 2019. So I'm going to try to display this here on your screen. So for this year, we did have the council look and submit your priorities for 2020. And listed on the left sheet are the priorities. You may recall in the past, before COVID, we used the sticky notes, and then we used a board to place up the notes. This year, because of everything going on with COVID, we've done this virtually over email and phone calls to go over the priorities for this year. So top of the list, on the right side of your screen, would be the Public Works Streets, which had 6 submissions in the Public Works category, with it appearing to be streets work, street infrastructure being the priority amongst the council members. We did have a listing of other infrastructure and sidewalks as two of the priorities, but in general, Public Works infrastructure just generally, which of course covers water, sewer, buildings, grounds, and our streets, came out as the #1 priority, with the street work specifically identified. And of course, in this upcoming budget, we will have a new allocation of general fund dollars for streets at about $150,000 if the council approves the budget as it is currently written. This last year, we had a similar amount budgeted for street work. And that work is actually about to get started on the 8th of this month. So we're just less than a week away from starting that project. Of course, these things take a while to gear up. Really, the best time to be putting projects out to bid is, December through early March, as people are, as contractors are getting ready for the work season. We did get good prices on our projects. So, as the council's aware, our priority at the moment is the construction work out on Aloha Fern Riverside. And again, that'll be starting in just a few days, in a few days' time. In terms of priority number 2, public safety general for this upcoming year, this council has been in the fortunate position of actually being able to add positions to the police department. So in the past, we've typically only had 5 officers budgeted in the budget since the 2010 reorganization. Oftentimes, on average, the positions filled in the department were sometimes as low as 2, but usually an average of about 3 positions in public safety. So that number has been increased to a budget allocation of 6.25. So we also have an additional part-time officer in there, which is filled. Right now, currently, we have 2 vacant positions in the department with 1 position pending to be filled, which has really been delayed by COVID. The need to perform physicals and whatnot has been difficult to achieve. But that has occurred. In addition, we made investments into the police department over the past few years. That includes newer vehicles, some of which were purchased, I believe, 5 or 6 years ago, the SUVs. We've also updated and integrated with the regional public safety law enforcement computer system, so files can be exchanged easier on between cases and information. The police department has access to a whole lot more information, current information about warrants and whatnot. In terms of priority number 3, economic development in general, the council has a fund set aside which totals a little over $300,000. The council has appropriated or made available funding for loans through REDAC in response to COVID. Those funds currently have not been utilized. There is one request pending, but that request will be filled regardless of the city's participation in that. But we're trying to make arrangements to make sure that we're participating in that. Otherwise, the funds are available to really at the discretion of the council in terms of what type of economic development activity might be useful. It could be providing third-party studies and analyses for investors to utilize targets of opportunity, those sorts of things. So there are additional funds available in the current proposed budget for this year. And in community development in general, we probably should have more of a conversation about, specifically what the council wants out of community type development. Right now, code enforcement is a pretty specific request out of that. And we placed that code enforcement under community development, just even though code enforcement really involves just about all the departments in the city. And then personnel general was the rounded out the top 5 priorities for the city council. The city has invested, and the employees have requested that there be a total compensation survey. So that is in the process of wrapping up, and we should be getting some of our initial looks at the study here in the next couple of weeks, and working with the employees over over those issues. As you know, the city has had a lot of turnaround over the years with staff, and which makes it difficult for the consistent delivery of services. So with that, I think what we might do is just kind of go through the list. If there are council members who'd like to clarify their priorities, some of them were kind of just general public safety, and you'll see on each of the entries there will be the council members' initials. The numbers, some council members prioritized individually on that ranking system. So you'll see, for example, DG5. And so that would be that particular council member's placement of in the priority list for the year. And then where there's no number after the initials, it just means that there was it was not specifically prioritized by a council member. What we're ultimately trying to do is find not the individual priorities of council members, but the priorities of the council as a whole and as a body. So the sheet on the right, if we want to be more specific about those priorities, that's what I would encourage the council to do, and to give direction in terms of those priorities to the extent that the council feels comfortable with and feels is reasonable. So with that, I'll return it to Mayor Garnes.
Thank you, City Manager. I will just call on each council member, and at that time, if you have something to specify, then you have at it. So I will start with Mayor Pro Tem Woodall.
Well, of course, you probably know what I'm going to say. Mine is nuisance abatement. It was #1 priority last year, and we didn't get very far with it. Now, I don't want to insult Chief Connor, because I've come to the conclusion, and I've said this before, that it was a lot to ask of him. And I hadn't realized that. But we still have a lot to do. We've had 56 open cases on our books for a long time. And we still have a lot to do in town. And I don't know if any of you drive around town, up and down the avenues. We have a house on 4th Street that must have 2 months of garbage sitting out front, white bags right in front in a trailer. There's homes that need to be have an abatement. One house I'm thinking about has just redone the whole house. Looks really nice, and they're going to sell it. And they were told by their realtor that it would be less value being it was next to the house it was, which is a house that really needed nuisance abatement. It's actually a hoarder's house. And I just think we need to really step up our game on this. If it just would help the whole town feel better, look better, and it makes a better feeling for our citizens, if things are cleaned up, and we can have some pride in our community. So that's just my push for nuisance abatement.
Thank you. Do you have any other, you don't have any of the other 4 items?
No, because it's pretty general on those.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Strawn.
Well, mine's always been street work and infrastructure in Reedell. That's what I think we need, number one. I definitely agree with Julie. We need to take care of our town, the abatement issues. And of course, safety for our citizens is very important to me also. That's all.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson.
Mayor Garnes, I put in there, implement the total compensation study, and it looks like we're going to be taking steps during the next several meetings to chat about that, and that's a very high priority with me. Also, for the council members, I think that, as was suggested before this COVID mess, that we establish policies that go beyond ethics on how we deal with one another, how we deal with the community, and how we deal with staff. Big priority for me. I also listed street work, and I think we need to have an annual street projects that pave our failing streets. And also public safety. I put in there that I believe we need to have 7 officers in our police department, because at any one time we can get back down to 2 or 3, and that's just not fair to the community or to the officers. Thank you very much, Mayor Garnes.
Thank you. Councilmember Wilson.
Yes, on the, I see PSPS is part of the public safety. Is that where that ended up? I know we're moving ahead on that. We've authorized a generator for the city hall, and I'm really excited about the fact that PG&E has tested the islanding, but I'm still,
Yeah.
I want to be reserved that till it happens. So anything that we can do to help our community have access to stuff, and then this COVID recovery, which is in part of economic recovery, is the biggest piece of it. But it's that's something that has to evolve. And I see that as the other part with community development. I also see that where Councilmember Woodall was talking about the code enforcement. Are there other, the fact that these people have a trailer full of garbage? I've heard a lot of the complaints about the cars. They know the system as well to apparently move them around on a regular basis so that they don't exceed ordinance limits. So my question is, do we need to change ordinances or add ordinances, or give the chief more teeth in his ability to mitigate these problems? Is that something that can be done, Chief Connor? Is there a tool we could give you?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I'll give it some consideration and I'll include it in the notes for the next meeting.
So what stops us from getting those? Is it just the way the nature of the beast, or what stops them from being able to get those cars and that garbage hauled away, where we said it's a nuisance, but it stays there? What's stopping?
So one, we're talking about 2 different houses on 4th Avenue. Not that the house with all the cars doesn't have a fair amount of solid waste. They're kind of a hoarder family. But it's not the same house that has the trailer full of trash. That house was issued a second administrative citation, and I'm working with the owner on getting the trash cleaned up. In terms of the cars, the main problem is they have more cars than they have parking space. And their cars are not high value, but they do run. Most of them are registered and insured. So we tag them for 72-hour parking. They move them. Somebody complains, we tag them again, they move them. And I think that's just the nature of the beast.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, did you have anything else?
No, that's it.
Thank you. mine were under public safety. Policing, I think that we need to have foot patrol or bicycle patrol. I think that a presence on the street, not just a car driving by, because the car can only go so slow. That I think that would help. So I don't know. I know we've talked. Well, I've talked before about bikes as they do it in Arcata, and I think that would be a very worthy thing, because then it's also when you have someone on the streets on the pavement or riding a bike, then they actually have personal interaction with people. And I think that would do a lot to help the situation out. And with regard to streets and infrastructure, I think that we should create a plan. I didn't send this to the city manager, but I did write it down. I think we should, with the general fund is healthy. I think that we should use the general fund monies that we can and not put ourselves in a bad position, and create a plan, create a grid to begin fixing the streets over and under the piping as well. Because we talked about when we started having revenue coming in, we were going to look at water rates and we were going to look at streets. And I think that if we can use some of this to begin to fix the streets under and over, create a 5-year calendar, for example, and set a reachable goal for each of those 5 years, and then execute that plan. I think that, because I think talking about it is nice, but until we actually develop a plan, there is nothing to implement. So I think that with regards to streets and infrastructure, I think that is a really, to me, it's a sensible way to go. Create a plan, create a grid, create a calendar, set a goal for each year, and then execute it. So, which by executing, it would be put in the budget every year for what our goal is for the respective year. With regard to personnel, we are doing the study that, so I think that's just going already, it's already in the works. And we have funds in our economic development so that we can talk during the year as to how we want to work on that. And then as well as community development. And I think with community development and the nuisance, which I totally agree on the nuisance issues and the abatement issues. I think having a CSO, which is going to come up in the budgetary section. But I think that we hopefully will be able to work that out and have code enforcement as well. So those are my ideas.
May I say something, Mayor Garn?
Oh, absolutely.
I think along the lines of what you're just saying about the plan, and then I think Councilmember Johnson, if I understood him right, said, having a plan every year to do a certain amount. And I know I think everybody's on good with streets, but what we've done in the past is we've talked about a lot of stuff, but we've never put this down like you're saying. Actually have a methodology and a plan in a grid that says this is A, B, C, and D. If A, B, and C doesn't get done, well, then it gets carried over to the next year, and we adjust the next years to do that. But if we actually put a plan in place that is, like you say, a 5-year plan, it's always rotating. At the end of this year, there's another 5th year. That there's always something out there for the city to be doing, and
Exactly.
And actually have it on paper rather than just talk about it. And then the next council, they get on to something else, and where there's already something, they would have to change it if this council sets those priorities. And each year it would be upgraded. So I think that's an excellent idea.
Thank you. So, are there any other things that a council member wants to say to staff or other council members here?
I would like to hear the citizens' input. There was supposed to be
I was gonna
for
get
this
to
item.
that. I was going to get to
Okay.
that. I was waiting. I was just making sure that we all were good.
Yeah, okay.
City Clerk, could you read the public comment, please?
Yes, we have one comment. It's from Renata Laughlin. And she says, I think newsletters sent out have done a great job keeping people informed. I think these should continue and contain the latest COVID information and suggested precautions. Nuisance abatement should remain a priority. In order to attract better tenants and potential home buyers, we need to alleviate blight. Households that cannot fit their autos in their household footprint need to find storage elsewhere. Parking in front of their neighbors' homes for extended period is not acceptable. Garbage service should be mandatory to avoid attracting rodents. Other items that can be addressed in newsletter. Parking, right-hand wheels parallel to right-hand curb or road edge, California Vehicle Code 22502. Drivers parking the wrong way, facing traffic, endanger other motorists and pedestrians. Auto stereo noise, California Vehicle Code 27007. Sound should not be heard outside of the vehicle from 50 feet or more. There is no legal reason to have amplified music playing from a parked vehicle for an extended period. Child passengers should not be exposed to loud music within the vehicle either. Fireworks. Commercial grade fireworks have no place in residential neighborhoods. It's not safe and it bothers your neighbors. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. City Manager, are there any other public comments?
So if anybody on the Zoom call wants to speak under public comment, please dial *9 right now.
And while we're waiting for that, are there any comments based on what Renata Laughlin statement? Anything?
I agree with everything she said.
Okay, then. Well, thank you.
And so, Mayor Garnes, I'm not seeing any hands raised in the Zoom call.
Thank you, City Manager. So now, what is it that you need from us in this moment, City Manager?
So we'll go back to the sheet so that based on the comments from the council, I did make a couple quick changes. So the under the community development section, which I'll try to highlight here. Under community development, it appeared to me that when the council members were discussing community development in general, that could also be that code enforcement would be that priority. So
Right.
You'll see in the lower left, I highlighted it. If we're 2 council members for community development in general, 2 with a little bit more specificity on code enforcement. And so you'll notice on the right side on the council's priority list, I went ahead and crossed out community development in general and replaced it with code enforcement. So code enforcement would again be specifically listed in the priority setting session for 2020. And then also based on the comments regarding public works and the priorities there, it was very clear that the council was talking about streets, and what it sounded like to me was that you were talking about as a group streets planning and implementation as that priority listing. So those are the changes that I made as a result of the conversation. And so if the council would like to clarify, now would be a good time.
Okay, Councilmember Wilson?
Yes, are the numbers when we see 1 through 5 is 1 top priority and 5 fifth priority?
Correct.
Okay, that's what I understood. Thank you.
Councilmember Strawn?
Looks great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Councilmember Woodall? Mayor Pro Tem Woodall?
Yes, Venus, yes, because I can't see. Can you just run down 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 quickly?
Absolutely. So number one priority would be streets planning and implementation. Number 2 would be public safety general. Number 3 would be economic development general. Number 4 would be code enforcement. Number 5 would be personnel general. So if there's any more specificity that the council wants to provide on the ones listed as general, we can go ahead and make it more specific, but I think those generally cover it.
Thank you.
Councilmember Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor Garnes. I would add that under economic development general, I believe that total build out of the Humboldt-Riadale Business Park should be our first economic development goal. Thank you.
Thank you. I certainly wish it would build out. I can tell you that. And I think that I understand 1 through 5 and the priority, if it is literally prioritized by 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, I would actually move code enforcement up. I thought code enforcement fell under public safety though, so not community development. That was just in my mind though. But it needs to be up there. It doesn't need to, like, we check off 1, 2, 3, and then it's June of next year. So I'm not sure how you address city manager the priorities, but is it something we can like do all kind of at once, or is it literally?
If it's consensus of the council, we can move number 4 up to number 1 and just have the rest of the list settle down. So the list would read streets and planning and implementation, or excuse me, the list would read number 1, code enforcement, number 2, streets planning and implementation, 3 would be public safety general, 4 would be economic development general, and 5 would be personnel general.
May I speak, Mayor Garnes?
Sure, absolutely.
I'd like to see code enforcement move to number 2 and leave streets and planning as number 1.
I agree with that.
I do too.
Fine with me.
Fine with me.
Moving it. For those not on screen, he's actually moving them around on the.
Yeah. All right.
Perfect.
So just so everyone, especially Julie and Gordon, it reads streets planning and implementation 1, 2 is code enforcement, 3 is public safety general, 4 is economic development general, and 5 is personnel general.
Looks good.
Fine.
I'm good.
Thank you. And now we will move on to the budget. What do we call this? We will move on to operate options for the fiscal year 2020-21 recommended budget. City manager.
All right. Thank you, Mayor Garnes, members of the council. This item is on page 37 of your packet. At the last meeting, the council gave some direction to staff to return with some options. that are listed on page 37 of your packet. We also have some additional supporting information included in the packet that includes the job description for a community services officer, a draft compensation schedule, our budget sheet from the last council meeting on the budget, so 2 weeks ago. And with that, we do have Cheryl Gillingham on the line, who can go through the report, and then we can answer any questions. So Cheryl.
Okay. Yeah, I'm here. I didn't actually realize you were going to switch it to me.
She's like, yikes. Right.
Well,
So-
here I'll go through it. Basically, what the council requested that we bring back options for are a community services officer. So that's split out, looking at that position as the full-time 12-month funded position. That's we also broke it out for a full time over a 10-month period, because there will be a lag time if the council approves this addition to the budget in terms of us recruiting somebody. And really 10 months is a very ambitious timeline, and assumes that there are no hiccups in the process. And then we also added in there for the council consideration a scaled back community services officer. So a part-time 24 hours a week position, and what the costs of that would be. In addition, it was requested that we look at the cost of the 7th officer for the police department. And so that's an estimate of approximately $96,000 for an additional peace officer. And then at the bottom of the list is the records tech on page 37, which has been a part-time position at 24 hours a week, has been previously funded with Measure Z. And so it does not appear that the city is going to be receiving any of those funds, as the only law enforcement agency requesting funds that was denied. But that total amount is a little over $23,000 for that position. And I think that's pretty much it for the request that the council made. Actually, one more thing I would just add on the discussion for the community services officer. There probably would be some additional costs associated with the position in terms of rolling it out. And it's not necessarily something that we need to discuss at this particular meeting, but there are questions about the available equipment for a community services officer who has animal control duties and whatnot. So a vehicle and that sort of thing, and office space as well. So just bear in mind, this is just we're just looking at the cost of the position, period.
Thank you. Council, questions? Councilmember Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor Garrett. I would have a question for Chief Connors. Chief, do you have anybody in mind that would serve as the community outreach officer?
I did until about an hour and a half ago when I had a conversation with the city manager. So no, at this time I do not. It's going to be a difficult position to fill.
Is 10 months realistic, or should that be scaled back to 8 months?
That's hard to say. Unlike, again, it depends on how much of a background we want to do for a police officer. 10 months would be the assumption. We pretty much had somebody we wanted to hire right now, and it would take 2 months to do the background investigation. We don't necessarily have to do as an extensive background investigation for a CSO as we would for a police officer, although many agencies do. And we have no idea who we're going to hire. So I think 8 months would be more realistic for next year's budget. But again, it's hard to say.
Thank you very much, Chief.
Question.
Any other questions?
Question.
Councilmember Johnson?
Nope.
No. Okay, Councilmember Wilson, I think I see you chomping at the bit.
Chomping at the bit. It shows there's the qualifications. It looks like a lot of skill set there. Would we have to do some training, or is that part of the process, Chief, of finding somebody that can do? There's a lot of stuff there to be able to be competent and do the job we're asking.
The chances of finding somebody who is a trained code enforcement person are pretty slim. So there would be a considerable amount of training. There is an organization, the California Association of Code Enforcement Officers. They have a 3-step training program. Each step is a week long. We would like to get a new hiree to at least one of those modules, if not more, in their first year. There would also probably be a lot of time that I would spend with this person, imparting what little wisdom I have left. And I don't know what's available for animal control training, but I would contact the county's animal control and see if they have something they would recommend. We kind of fudge it when we come to try and catching in dogs, but I have a feeling that there is some method to our, trying and catch them with dog bones, and hope they'll hop in the car. Catching a dog with a catch pole is a lot harder than it looked.
Not bad. Okay, and I'm just saying there may be some costs associated with it that may need to be budgeted in for training them, but it might be a
Most
trade-off
definitely.
because they would be there less months than the original process. My other question was on the records technician. We've already budgeted that in our current budget that I see was on the same sheet that we got this time. So we've already budgeted for that. Is that correct?
It's in the budget. However, the revenue source for that position was still listed as Measure Z. So with the grant going away, the position would need to be funded elsewhere. And so the general fund would pick up that under the proposal, the general fund would pick that up.
I thought we already did that, but we haven't done that. I thought we already pulled it and put it in the general fund. Maybe I was wrong. I thought from the last meeting that talking with Chief Connor that he expressed that he did need the records technician in his makeup. I see it here. It's
Still under Z.
major funding Z for the police department. Okay. Those are my only questions.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Strawn?
Is it necessary to get a full-time person, or do you feel like it's mainly paperwork push and we can do with a part-time?
For the records tech, are you referring to?
No, I'm talking about the community service officer.
Oh, okay.
No, the records tech, there should be other funding out there. Have you looked into any of that, city manager?
For alternative grants to pay for that?
Yes.
I'm not aware of any, but certainly we would, make application if there was another opportunity to fund it.
No, I'm talking about the community service officer at part-time versus full-time.
There's the potential to utilize CDBG funding for code enforcement activity. Right now, I cannot guarantee that we would be successful in being able to utilize those funds for that, but that is definitely an option to mitigate the cost impact of the position.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Woodall?
Yeah. Cheryl, I just want to make sure I have some numbers right. Joanne was telling me we had budgeted $30,000 last year for code enforcement. And there was 29,511 left at this point. Would that be right?
That sounds about right. I do believe it was reduced in the proposed budget, though.
Yes, it was reduced to 10,000, but I mean, we didn't spend much last year on it. I would personally be happy with a part-time employee for code enforcement and animal control. And long as if it's a 24-hour part-time employee, I would like it be completely dedicated to code enforcement and animal control. Now, if you went with a full-time employee and a CSO, then I would still like to make sure that 24 hours of his shift was dedicated specifically for that. And Kevin was really good when he was doing nuisance abatement. We moved along fairly quickly, and he has a lot of knowledge too, and I would like Kevin to impart some of his knowledge about the codes and the standard housing codes that, you know, are extra that can be followed. And it's mainly what I said. I just need to make sure that if it's a CSO, that it's 24 hours dedicated if you hire for a full-time, and that's it.
Thank you. I think that it's, if it's already going to be difficult to hire a CSO, I think hiring a part-time CSO with a list of their required duties and no benefits is going to be pretty almost impossible. So I would definitely go for the full-time 10-month CSO if that's something that we can do. And I was going to ask this chief if there was a full-time CSO, could that person be used for records tech, or is that's crossing too many lines, or what?
Well, it would definitely be possible to combine those two positions, but one of Sabrina's primary functions in the police department is to be the face of the police department. When you come, she's the one who's there. When you call, she's the one who answers the phone. She rarely, if ever, leaves the station.
Right.
If you had somebody who you wanted to be proactive, those are not really mutually compatible job classifications.
Okay, that makes sense.
But it could be done.
That makes sense. But it makes sense what you said. I guess at this point, city manager, we are basically trying to sort the time frame of a CSO and a records tech, two separate individuals. So I guess I would ask the council then, is this a vote or is this a consensus? First of all, city manager.
I think there needs to be a motion. What I might recommend to the council is based on the input is to direct staff to budget for a full-time CSO for 10 months in the 2021 fiscal year, and bring back at the next budget hearing any of the additional costs, for training for equipment that that the individual would need to be able to perform the job successfully. And then also to add the records tech position to the general fund and keep the position funded.
Okay. Is there anyone who make a motion to that encompasses what the city manager just said, 10 full-time, 10 months for 2021, and all the ancillary things that go with it, and then the part-time 24-hour records tech? Is there a motion?
So moved, Mayor Garnes.
I'll second.
Councilmember Johnson moved and Mayor Pro Tem seconded.
Do you have a discussion?
We can have a discussion.
And my question is on the ancillary equipment, is that's not including a vehicle for a dog catcher vehicle, is it?
So we would need to have that conversation at the staff level in terms of what would be needed to make the position functional. And so I don't know exactly what if we could utilize existing equipment and vehicles and whatnot, but we would certainly have to make some adjustments to the budget, which to be able to provide that equipment for the individual. It certainly is a conversation. We don't necessarily have to add that to the budget now. We can have that as a budget adjustment when we get more specific information. But right now, it would definitely there would be some equipment that would need to be purchased or leased, and then there would also need to be an additional allocation in the police department for that training that Chief Connor discussed earlier.
So, and if you bring these things back, then that's really it's not in concrete. It's you bringing back the numbers and us having the ability to look at them and make a decision based on what you bring back.
Yeah. So what we would do is the budget is scheduled for final adoption on the 16th at your next regular scheduled meeting. So we would bring this back incorporated into the budget. And we would kind of pull that out and highlight that change from the last time that the council looked at the budget. And then you can have that discussion then in final adoption as to, whether you want to pull it out or, move forward with a staff recommendation.
Thank you. Is there any other questions or discussion from the council? Go ahead, Sue.
Yes, so 10 months, you're just saying for the budget year because it's going to take 2 months to get them in. But in reality, you're talking full-time $76,000 essentially.
Yeah, so for the next budget year, 21-22, you would expect to see a cost somewhere around that $76,000 figure ongoing.
Is that it, Councilwoman? Okay.
Yes,
Any other questions? Councilmember Johnson or Woodall?
None.
No.
Well, having a motion and a second, City Clerk, could you do a roll call, please?
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem Woodall,
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Strand,
No,
Councilmember Wilson,
Yes.
and Mayor Garnes.
Yes. So the motion carries 4-1 with Councilmember Strawn objecting. And so let's see, that brings us to council reports.
Mayor Garnes, we really never did discuss, I don't think, full-time police officer.
Well, that's fact, we didn't. Yeah, we should have brought that up before we did the motion. But go ahead and, I mean, is that okay, city manager, that Councilmember Johnson? I don't know how that works. Actually.
We can have a separate motion on that if it would have a motion. What I would say on that. That's the $96,000 is a full year. What we're experiencing in law enforcement right now is really a difficulty across the board, across multiple agencies in terms of recruiting and retaining law enforcement officers on the North Coast of California. So we're hoping that within the next 2 to 6 weeks that we will have 5 positions filled with 6 budgeted. So adding a 7th at this point in time, the council can do it, but I think it will be very hard to fill that 7th position. I think we're going to be lucky to fill the 6th officer within the next 8 months. So already there's going to be some salary savings in the police department this year, just because it can take over 6 months to do a recruitment for these positions. They're highly vetted. It takes a lot of time to do that. So if the council wants to, we can bring back options to add funding for a 7th officer. It would look something along the lines of, at best, half of that budgeted number for just this fiscal year. But it's really up to the council. If you want to add and go to a 7th officer, we can certainly bring back in the final budget some changes to facilitate that down the road.
Council.
Mayor
Councilmember. Yes, go ahead.
The reason that I've brought this up numerous times is that, the 7 years or so that I've been on council, we've been down to a chief and a sergeant for extended periods of time, even though we had 4, 5, 6 people authorized. It's easy for police officers to walk away from Rio Dell and go to another jurisdiction. It's like pulling teeth to get somebody out of the academy through all the hoops to get them hired here. In the last month and a half, we've seen 2 well-trained officers leave. There's nothing saying that we could not see 2 more well-trained officers leave in the next month and a half. I want our police department to have, and the city to have, the flexibility that we can hire qualified candidates when they become available. And I know it's going to take 6 months or longer. It might take a year, better part of a year, to get a 7th body working for our police department. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Wilson, I saw you had your hand raised there.
Kind of along the lines of what Councilmember Johnson said, that if I've authorized 6, to me, I don't see any difference if authorizing 7 if I've only got 2. I still need to find 4 or 5. And so I'm still always in the mode to be picking up the numbers to make it to 6. And I think it's going to be a challenge to ever get to 6. And I know the academy is struggling to get recruits. I can't imagine what it's going to be like here next year with everything that's gone down in the last short period of time. I wouldn't want to be a police officer. I think it's going to be tough to find recruits that really want to do this as a profession. And so I'm good with staying with 6. And if there seems to be a opportunity to find more of them, then we can always come back as a council and authorize the 7th. But whether you put whatever number you put on it, you're still only going to get to draw from who's there to draw from. And so I don't want to see the budget get pushed up, be inflated artificially so that we're spending money we don't have. That's my take. I'd stay with 6.
Thank you. Councilmember Strawn?
I
Comments?
agree with Councilmember Wilson.
Mayor Pro Tem Woodall?
I would agree to stay with 6.
Thank you. I think I would agree to stay with 6 just because we can't even get to 6. And I do agree that if we get to 6 and we hold on to 6, then we can look to adding 7. But currently we are trying to get to 5 without anyone sitting even on the sidelines for 6. So it just, I'm good with staying with 6. So I think that's pretty much the consensus. Is that a vote thing?
I think that's clear enough, Mayor Garnes.
Thank you. Thank you. So now we're moving on to council reports. It was really difficult.
I
Are
have
there
one.
any council reports? Councilmember Mayor Pro Tem Woodall.
Okay, first I'd like to thank Nick and the Chamber of Commerce for the flag display on Memorial Day. And there was more that helped other than that. I'd like to thank the Eagle family and Ben, their little boy, Eli and Ronnie Sanderson, Mark and Jenny Gillum, and Michael McDermott for helping with the flags. Great community effort. The other thing is Nick Angeloff and his workers that work with him, the archaeologists, are putting in a garden on the community garden center. And it's pretty neat. They're going to set up a vegetable stand in town. And what doesn't sell at the vegetable stand, they will donate to the seniors for free. And I think that's a lot of people were up there working, and then that also is a good effort. The next thing is there has been a lot of tagging, and I brought that. I had given all the council pictures of that at the last meeting, and I didn't get to speak on it. But none of it has been cleaned up except for one gentleman cleaned his sidewalk. And this morning there was an especially worrisome tag on the side of a building downtown. And thanks to Tammy Paul and Gina Thompson and the kids, they got down there immediately this morning and painted over it. I really think we need to be much more proactive on tagging. It just breeds more tagging if you don't. And we have we need to contact Caltrans. We also have some on our own property. And I don't know how we're going to work with the properties that are like businesses and things. I mean, if we can cover them right away or something, I would love to see us do it. I don't know what kind of problems that is covering on people's private property, but we really need to be proactive on that. And my last thing is, can we stop these Zoom meetings? I'm ready to meet in the council room again. It's much easier for me. And that's it.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson?
I would absolutely echo the 3 points that Mayor Pro Tem Woodall made. And I would say that by the city not painting over graffiti that's on our property, we are in effect encouraging more graffiti. So I would like us to have a policy of, as soon as we find it on our property, paint it over. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Strawn?
We had a HCOG meeting that was really long and involved this time. Actually had Kent Sawaski, who's the head of the Taxpayer League, came to HCOG asking for HCOG to put on the ballot a tax, which was amazing. But HCOG did vote it down because most of the cities have their own tax right on the ballot this fall. But the county, the Taxpayer League is concerned regarding all of the roads in Humboldt County and all the fixing that needs to be done, and the degradation of our road system. So we have agreed that in 2022, we would put it on the ballot to a tax, a 1/4 of a cent tax to fix the roads in Humboldt County. There also was a big discussion about RTA bus routes, and they wanted to take them off of Riedel, Scotia. They wanted to remove our RTA bus route. And I fought for that. They wanted to do a pilot project with Trinidad, with Riedel, Scotia, and with Manila if somebody wanted the RTA, they needed to call an Uber or call a taxi and then go to the hub of Fortuna, where they could then get on an RTA. So they decided to do the pilot program, but they're only going to restrict it to Manila right now and see how that works out. But that may be coming down the road. But
So is that something we can, as a city, is that something we can address, write letters or get the community involved? Because that seems like a serious hit.
I know, I was very concerned about it. And no, I really felt like the rest of the committee was supporting us. So I think I think we'll just see what happens in Manila. If it comes again, I will definitely make you aware, and then I think a letter might be written. But I felt like they really were in agreement that we needed the service. We needed it in our area, in both Riedel and in Scotia. Of course, Scotia has no representation, but I tried to represent them also.
Well, thanks for that fight. That was a worthy fight. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Good job.
That's it.
Okay, and I was in the meeting, like Kyle had said earlier, and with DHHS and the Resource Center, and we are going to, they had to have some conversations with their staff, but then we are going to then get right back together. I've had League of Cities, the regional meeting that was supposed to be here in March. We did a Zoom meeting. It was actually a conference call, but we did that last Friday. And so basically that was an update of all what the cities are up to, and going over legislation that we will, as a body, the league will support or oppose. And then they're doing a statewide commercial thanking first responders, thanking the citizens for doing their part. And they asked me to do it's a 2-minute commercial that will run statewide, and it has 13 mayors are a part of throughout the state. There are 13 mayors that they chose. I was one of them. So Riedel will be represented in this commercial when we're thanking the city employees, the emergency responders, and the citizens of California. And it'll be, for example, Bakersfield, San Miguel, Santa Cruz, Fontana, Yountsville. There'll be 13 cities that will be a part of that commercial that will run statewide, and Riedel will be part of that commercial. So when it goes live, I'll let you guys know when it goes live, and then it's going to be on a collaboration between the League of California Cities and Comcast. And that's all I have.
I'm
Congratulations,
Yeah.
Mayor Garnes.
Mayor Garn.
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you. Go ahead, Frank.
We had an RCA meeting, and it was a budget meeting, and they've lowered their budget from 54 million to 46 million. The biggest portion of that is purchasing power energy that they're sold back to the customers. This is a point of notice that came up again today. The part you see on your bill, on your RCA bill, is not an additional bill to your power to go through RCA. It's replacing the power that PG&E would have sold you, and you don't save a lot. You might save 25, 50 cents a month, but anyhow, it's not an additional 27, 30 bucks charge. But what they come up with the issue is in lowering their budget is they've budgeted in a $1 million for the next year loss for people that don't pay their bill, because the state has said that if we're not going to turn anybody off. And so if someone doesn't pay their bill, then RCA still has to essentially pay PG&E that money. PG&E, when I pressed it harder, PG&E has the luxury of amending their rates, so they just pick it up and charge whatever they lose. They just add it to everybody else's bill. RCA would have the same option, but they would have to spread it out over a lot less people, and that $1 million could possibly go to all the ratepayers. So they said they're not going to do that. It'll probably come out of the reserve of RCEA to fund that. So in one way that's encouraging, but it's also kind of scary that people may not be paying their bill. And there's Estelle Fennell asked if there was going to be an accountability that you just don't take advantage of the fact I don't have to pay my bill, but it's actually COVID related. So they are pursuing that. Yeah, pursuing the state also to reimburse us, since it's a state's mandate. And that's all I had to report.
Thank you. And have I overlooked anyone? Okay. Well, if not, is there a motion to adjourn?
Mayor Garnes, I'd move for adjournment.
There's a second?
Second it.
Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Meeting adjourned until our next regular meeting of June 16th. Thank you.